Our theme this year is engaging in speculative pedagogy, reimagining library futures with creative foresight. The CCLI Steering Committee was especially drawn to this theme because it encompasses both the mundane and the spectacular in instruction work. Today is not a day of stock options and projected numbers. Instead, we borrow from the realm of speculative fiction a guiding principle, an uncanny kind of permeability under pressure. Because our communities, collaborators, and tools are constantly changing, we wanted to plan a conference that dares us to dream new processes while also deconstructing what no longer serves users or the library. Past CCLI conference themes addressed instructional design, student-centered work, and inclusive practices. This conference echoes and amplifies many of those themes. But it is our hope that the conversations today will live at the intersection of practice and imagination, where you can define your speculative pedagogy. Our conference workshops and presentations engage with such concepts as critical thinking and citational justice, information privilege, power literacy, problem-based and hands-on approaches to instruction, open education and accessibility, gamification, student-led programming, and liberatory instruction. Which leads us to our honored keynote speaker today, Jen Brown. Jen is an undergraduate learning and research librarian at UC Berkeley and an Ignite Award-nominated science fiction and fantasy author. You may have attended her presentations at LOEX, ARL, or ACRL, to name a few. Or you may have read her chapter, Leaning on Our Labor, Whiteness and Hierarchies of Power in LIS Work, in the edited volume from MIT Press entitled Revolutionize Library and Information Science Studies Through Critical Race Theory. Critical pedagogies guide her instruction, reference, and advocacy work, which includes serving as one of the community managers for We Here, an organization that provides supportive communities for Black and Indigenous and people of color in LIS. There, she supports BIPOC library and archive workers, stewards impactful community projects like We Reads, and serves on the advisory board for Uproot, a We Here publication. Jen's published research examines academic labor inequity using critical race theory, institutional diversity work through the lens of white hegemonic performance culture, and critical race pedagogies within library instruction. Meanwhile, her flash fiction, short stories, and her novelette center Black queer characters wielding power amid fantastic other worlds. Her work has been published in FIYAH Literary Magazine, Tor.com, Podcastle, Anathema Magazine, Baffling Magazine, and was recently translated for an issue of Chrononautica Magazine's Matreon publication. We're thrilled that Jen has taken the time to be with us today and give today's keynote presentation. So, without further ado, please welcome Jen Brown.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I'm going to go ahead here and get my screen shared. Okay, so I think everyone should be able to see that. Just thank you so much for having me, first and foremost, and just welcome everyone, and thank you for sharing time and space with me at this year's California Conference on Library Instruction. I am so excited to both be here, but also to think aloud and co-create with y'all today, and what I hope will be a generative, reflective space. And first, I'd like to embody that spirit of co-creation by extending my thanks to CCLI's planning committee members. I want to specifically call them out by name. Thank you to Matthew Collins, Jeff Corrigan, Catherine Fonseca, Amber Jansen, Megan Kinney, Irene Korber, Anna Lavia, Annette Martinez, Stephanie Miller, Daniel Ransom, Penny Scott, Kyoko Shiosaki, Karen Turco, and Jenny Yap. Conference planning, I know from firsthand experience, is a constant uphill battle and climb. And I really hope that rest and restoration is on the other side of this work for all of y'all. Now, before I begin this keynote, I'd like everyone to take a moment. I want you to shift from wherever you were or wherever your mind was before and set aside some space to dream with me for a bit. This keynote is all about carving out a speculative pocket, a bubble in time and space to, as scholar, writer, activist, and doula Adrienne Marie Brown puts it, to have a conversation that only these people in this room at this moment can have. You're here for a reason this morning. And no matter what time it is or where you are, it may not be morning where you are even, no matter where you're coming from, your presence today is enough. So, at your own pace, I'd like you to settle into your skin. Start by becoming aware of your body. What's supporting it? Maybe notice the ground beneath your feet or the seat holding you. And when you're ready, close your eyes or soften your gaze. Feel your eyelids growing heavy. Allow shapes and colors to soften or to blur. With that soft attention, take several deep, slow breaths at your own pace. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Feel where that breath begins. Follow its path down your throat, past your chest, filling your belly. Then follow it out. Feel each exhale softening your body, your shoulders, your neck. And for just a moment, allow gravity, that ever-present force, thrumming and alive through our cells and skin. Allow it to hold you without resisting, without tensing or tightening. Here and now, you simply are. A breath, a heartbeat, a hum of vibrational energy chiseled from the ashes of stars. Allow yourself to be. Breathe in and out. And when you're ready, softly and slowly open your eyes. Now, I hope that that meditation grounded you a bit in this moment. I hope it helps you become a little bit more present and aware, one with the universe, if only for a second. And I hope you hold on to even a modicum of those feelings as you navigate the conference today. Now, Stephanie already gave such a wonderful introduction about me, so I won't belabor any of the points that you see on the screen here. However, I do feel it's important to say a bit more about who I am and where I'm coming from. I am a Black American librarian and author, a cis bisexual femme who uses she, her pronouns, and I serve as one of the community managers for the organization We Hear, as you heard a bit about. I'm also a pet parent. And so if you hear any serenades from my cat Blue, or I don't think you've heard any because he's pretty silent, but he can kick it up, he can get loud. If you hear any serenades, though, you're welcome. He's the joy and light of my life. So I'm always glad when he joins me for a bit of singing. But equally important to this work, I'd like to share what I'm not. Because even the best keynotes come with assumptions that I, by being in this position today, hold some elevated status or knowledge that others don't have. Now, not to downplay my gifts, but I find it helpful to say explicitly, I'm not here claiming to be an expert. And I'd really rather do away with the concept of expertise altogether. What I am is a practitioner, a creative whose work veers toward the speculative simply by the very nature of what I do. By day, I guide undergraduates in demystifying academic scholarship. And when I'm not guiding folks, I'm building worlds out of words. I'm writing Black queer characters righteously reclaiming power amid fantastical and galactic empires because for so long, white science fiction and fantasy authors couldn't imagine futures or mythical pasts with Black folks in them. So I hope to share my passion for this topic, but none of it is gospel, right? It's just the way that I work. And speaking of what I'm not, I'm very aware of what it means to present here today as a Black woman. And so often folks say things like, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. But I'm not that either. Imagining what my Southern Black ancestors actually wanted feels speculative, like trying to reach across time to understand what Mary and Primus Rhodes, ancestors on my dad's side, dreamed of. While being dragged from South Carolina to Bienville, Louisiana by slave owner Colin Rhodes, they likely didn't dream of this conference. They probably wanted rest, freedom. And I would be doing them and every one of my other ancestors a disservice by pretending I've made it, or that my lived reality embodies their deepest desires, wants they were likely unable to achieve. To dream or speculate on my own work cannot be done without acknowledging what was stolen from them. And furthermore, we as a collective cannot begin to speculate future visions of library instruction or library work without acknowledging our collective pasts, without naming where we're working. Today, I specifically come to you as a settler occupying Wechan territory, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Muwekma Ohlone peoples, as well as the Lisjan Ohlone peoples under the Confederated Villages of Lisjan, located in the Alameda and Contra Costa counties of Northern California. I encourage everyone, but especially my California-based folks, to explore tangible ways to support Indigenous land rights in our state. Some ways include the things that you heard Stephanie share in the opening. Some other ways include the California Tribal Fund and California's COVID-19 Recovery and Resiliency Fund for Native-led organizations. I have links to these in my slide, but if folks know of other ways to tangibly support Indigenous nations, please feel free to put those into the chat. And before moving on, I'd like to offer a brief content warning because the next slide will feature a quick discussion of gender-based violence. It's equally important to me that I draw our collective attention to our Mexican sisters in Nuevo León as they fight for recognition of the gendered violence happening in their country. Given US imperialism and tourism's effect on feminized bodies across the globe, especially trans and lesbian femmes, we, you, I, and others cannot pretend that these atrocities aren't happening. Now, with that, today's talk is going to move through the following topics. Before we dream up speculative imaginings, we should first unearth, name, and discuss the histories that libraries at large have failed to address. Guiding questions for this area might be, what histories have we buried in favor of professional neutrality? Next, I'll discuss what radical yet responsible dreaming looks like. This is where I'll bring in frameworks that have nourished my own speculative lens and offer some reflective activities for you to begin your own thought work. And finally, I'll wrap by discussing what equitable, anti-racist speculative pedagogies might look like using examples from my own work. And a quick mic check, because I'm hearing another voice in the background and some soft typing. So if anyone is unmuted, please take a moment to mute yourself. So deeply appreciate you for doing that. Now, let's begin with a question. What does it mean to think or dream speculatively? This year, CCLI's theme focuses on putting the traditional and safe aside, allowing ourselves to engage in the speculative, which has the power to propel our imaginations and dream the impossible. As a librarian and an author, to me, speculating and speculative thought is to dream. To build entire worlds from questions, to trace the remnants of my thoughts like stellar dust, reshaping them into something new. I do this, and to some extent, I think we all do this because of the weight that stories hold. They're how we archive and pass down histories. They're how we record events and detail happenings. They're how we connect generations with Motown songs about mountains high enough and hearing whispers through the grapevines. Now imagine, for instance, the story that this house is telling. In a very real way, it's giving Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, right? Because Hobbiton is a real place you can visit. Shout out to New Zealand. That's where this was taken. This is literally part of the set that they used. But if I looked at this house, even without that connection, I'd know things about it. Its sloping windows tell a story. And from the way its door curves, I might know something about who calls it home. Its gardens and trees tell me what its occupants prioritize, what they tend. But there is a saying that scholar Chris Manjapra has, one I've constantly thought about. When defining the term settler colonialist, he wrote, colonizer societies actively forget and disavow their colonial histories. And what are stories but a kind of history, memories and imaginings that we share? Except we tend to purposefully omit certain versions of those histories, don't we? If they're not idyllic enough or not palatable. And the thing about houses is that they're surrounded by history, whether we bury it or not. They're built upon those stories, and those stories are fingerprinted into the walls. Often, I think of librarianship like a house, an old Gothic Victorian, much like the house in one of my favorite books from last year, Silvia Moreno Garcia's Mexican Gothic. In that book, the house had a throat and a maw and monsters living inside, and it spent centuries swallowing the women who entered it. Collectively, we've told a lot of stories about librarianship, depending on who you speak to, where they work, and what level of power they hold over decisions and policies and collections and programs or services. You might only get the falsehoods. The truth is, librarianship and libraries in general often feel like that haunted, creaking Victorian. It's a field that trains its most disenfranchised, gobbling up our time, knowledge, and gifts without remorse. Hell, let's be real. The entire academy does this. And to speculate or dream of radical futures for our field, I believe we have to start by exhuming the shadows. Otherwise, we cast the same silhouettes everywhere we walk, and we continue to bury the stories that we're ashamed of. Now, librarianship's biggest fallacy might be neutrality, the idea that institutionally it serves the public good and that it's always avoided capitalist, patriarchal systems of oppression and violence. The first photo that you see here is of Tougaloo College undergraduates taken in 1961. These Black students, dubbed the Tougaloo Nine, were arrested by Jackson, Mississippi police officers for staging a read-in at a segregated whites-only library. Why? Because Jackson's library for Black residents lacked access to collections and materials these students needed, and because the white librarian on duty called officers in the first place. I provide both images here of the original nine and of a recent event memorializing their read-in with a plaque. This is a story that most LIS students don't ever learn, a story most of us have gone our entire careers without hearing spoken. And you see, science fiction and fantasy authors weren't the only ones who couldn't imagine Black folks freely moving through their worlds and their stories. The same was once true of public libraries. Here in On the Battle to Desegregate the Nation's Libraries by Dr. Cynthia R. Greenlee, she discusses a library in Locust, New Jersey, where Black patrons entered a back door in order to be led to a small room segregated from the reading room provided to white patrons. The year was 1945, 10 years before the time frame of HBO's series Lovecraft Country, but it would take nearly 20 years before segregated libraries were abolished. And like all stories, I hear this and the Tougaloo Nine story, and I chart my own path and those of my loved ones within it. Because each story is like a tapestry. It weaves and knots and connects with others. In the 1970s, my mother attended Pepperdine University. Now, that was before Pepperdine that folks probably know of today, the one with the Malibu campus situated near the ocean. This was back when Pepperdine was a constellation of buildings in downtown Los Angeles, which of course included a library. My mother told me a story once, and it's never left my mind. She was a student entering Pepperdine's library to check out books, and when she approached the circulation desk, a white male staffer looked directly at her and continued working. He said nothing, took no steps to acknowledge or speak to her. And when another white student walked up behind her, that clerk jumped to attention. She was only served because that other student noted her presence and offered to wait until she'd been helped. And this is what I mean by stories, the stories we haven't heard. For all librarianship's self-congratulatoriness and supposed claims of neutrality, we never talk about how race and being racialized within the United States continues to affect the way that folks navigate our libraries. And I'm by no means saying that my mother's experience was the norm, but I'm saying that it happens and folks rarely talk about it. And if you think all of those stories are past tense tellings, well, that's a fallacy too. Alexander McNabb is a Black graduate student at Columbia University in New York City, a university where I worked a number of years ago. In 2019, McNabb entered Barnard College's campus to study after hours at the Milstein Center for Teaching and Learning, which also housed its library. He was then accosted and arrested by Barnard College's campus security, who cited an uneven policy which dictated that he needed to show his identification card when entering campus after hours. But having worked on that campus, I can tell you from firsthand experience, they rarely carded folks. I remember that brutality so poignantly. And in fact, in the days following it, I wrote an open statement, and I'll resurface those words because I still believe this. The attack was racist. It was emblematic of police brutality, and it's yet another example of how Barnard and Columbia students of color have to navigate systemic racism and state-sanctioned violence, even on campuses whose missions claim to stand against such things. And while those stories recount the experiences of users navigating our spaces, that's to say nothing about how actual library workers are treated on the job. I could do a whole separate talk on that. And in fact, I've written about it pretty extensively, everything from performative diversity work to salary inequities and workload imbalances. I've dedicated so much time to studying how institutional documents like committee charges, job descriptions, and program statements completely misalign with a library worker's lived experience. And frankly, the burden of proof isn't on me or you. Labor inequity in our so-called service profession runs deep, as Fobazi Attar's pivotal term, vocational awe, discusses. That set of ideas and values and assumptions that librarians have about themselves and the profession, which results in libraries being seen as inherently good and sacred and pretty much beyond critique. COVID-19's impact on staffing and frontline workers further exposed those inequities, especially when the institutional response to ongoing pandemic issues ranged from saying things like, "We're resilient, we're strong, we're service-minded above all else." But I can think of nothing more dystopian than placing profit over people. And this is where perhaps speculative and other critical pedagogies might come into play. And I'm not even talking about pedagogy as something we study or cite, but rather something that you and I live each day as we teach others and care for ourselves. To me, pedagogy is the act of unlearning systems of harm and anguish baked into the way we work and learn. It's the lessons, both large and small, that we take with us. It's the way that stories and understandings nestle in our bones. We can't dream our way out of these harms without learning to see ourselves as both a part of and constantly affected by oppressive systems. See, Octavia Butler once wrote, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you." Call it change, call it entropy, the unpredictable chaos of a system and all its component parts. But pedagogy feels to me a bit like guiding shared change, like cupping it between our palms, slipping sand-like through our fingers. We can't hold on to change, but we can learn and unlearn and do the most radical thing, in my opinion, which is to set aside time and space to dream about what could be without replicating the harms of what was. So then the big question is, how do we allow ourselves to dream radically yet responsibly? To speculate boldly without replicating those same harms of the past? As a writer, I put pen to paper, first concretizing my jumbled thoughts and ideas into something approaching realness. I make it firm and solid in my mind's eye. I usually start with a bold, often unanswerable question. I let myself stand in the impossible. For example, what if people in a galactic empire, millions of light years away, possessed the ability of sharing histories through quantum fields? And what if that galactic empire saw Black bodies and Black possibility as something worth profiting off of? Now, that's a big question, and it's something I'm noodling on creatively. But I find that those big speculative questions aren't meant to generate perfect answers. Typically, they create more questions, more thought experiments, more moving and mentally mapping possibilities into slow, actionable steps. Now, with writing, that step involves me putting some pen or keyboard to digital paper. But I use the same creative and speculative thinking in my instructional librarianship, asking questions like, what if undergrads could access research support beyond the traditional one-shot? What if it comprised a constellation of services and mediums and modalities? What if we infused deeper discussions of criticality and care into learning about the research lifecycle? In both cases, both with the writing questions and with these kind of speculative pedagogical questions, the common denominator was pretty straightforward for me. It was time. I gave myself time outside of work to imagine and play and reflect on stories. And my library department head gives me and my colleagues time and space to dream up alternative instructional methods. Not simply another meeting on the calendar and not just for appearances. We carve out real unstructured time throughout our work week to ask, well, what's possible? Now, possibility is exciting and all, but there's that responsibility piece, right? How do we consider what's possible in responsible and caring ways? How do we dream without perpetuating those same cycles of harm that often reside at the core of library, archives, cultural heritage, and overall societal work and workspaces and workplaces? Well, I would argue that it's not only our job to do the work, but we're responsible for finding people to do that work with us, to work with others, right? I suggest you find people who share this excitement and care, and like networks of webs, hold on to them. Find folks who will keep it real with you and honor when you need to engage in what Adrienne Maree Brown calls principled struggle. In We Will Not Cancel Us, she describes this as when we're struggling for the sake of something larger than ourselves and are honest and direct with each other while holding compassion. Often, holding ourselves accountable in any kind of change work means having difficult conversations about our imaginings but also our perceived understandings. It means acknowledging the positions from which we're dreaming, what we know and don't know, and to understand our limits and our areas for growth. To acknowledge that even having the time to think speculatively, like we're talking about right now, is in and of itself a privilege, considering the way capitalism and labor exploitation works in our world. There's a Solange interlude that I love from a song on her recent album called When I Get Home. It's called Nothing Without Intention. And in it, she has this repeating refrain: nothing without intention. Do nothing without intention. And when I think about dreaming radically and responsibly, I think of do nothing without co-conspirators, without collaborators and the people who matter to you. One of those people, one of my fellow UC Berkeley colleagues and my dear friend, Kyoko Shiosaki, said something recently. She said that doing this work matters little without the creative and emotional wells we draw from, and without the folks who matter doing it right beside us. And I offer unparalleled folks to the people who've helped me learn and unlearn, including Kyoko, Tamara Rhodes, Sophia Leung, Jorge R. Lopez McKnight, my entire We Here family, including Jenny Ferretti, Charlotte Rowe, Nicolette Davis, Crystal Chin, my author friends, Brent Lambert and Susan Palumbo. Dreaming responsibly or intentionally in any way means surrounding yourself with the right folks, to engage in principled struggle with them, lovingly calling each other in and gently challenging one another to think beyond your current perspectives. And today's conference is an opportunity for all of us to dream collectively, right? Try to find some folks today in the chat or on Twitter if you're using the conference hashtag. Try to find some folks who care about this as much as you do. Now, you've heard a bit about this work and why it matters to me, but I want you all to take some time now to reflect on what your own speculative pedagogies and thoughts might look like. For 3 minutes, I want you to think through, what do you want the time and space to speculate, dream, imagine, or learn/unlearn today? You can be as specific or as general as you like, but consider this your time to name and claim your own speculative intentions. And if you feel comfortable, you can go ahead and put your responses in the chat and start connecting with each other. And I'm going to have some music going as we're co-thinking. I saw some beautiful reflections and imaginings in the chat, and I wish I had time to kind of dig into them, but I hope that you're connecting with each other and seeing the beautiful framings that folks are coming up with. Now, I mentioned that none of this work is gospel, right? It's the way I work. But I do have some texts that I think have been pivotal to my own thinking, and they've helped me challenge myself in turn. The first thing is really just the entire book of Emergent Strategy. It's by Adrienne Maree Brown, and it's the first book I read that unmade my thinking about systems and my role within them, like literal organizations and structures of friend groups and community groups. After all, no one person is an island. None of my dreams are done in isolation, and none of it happens without including folks in other positions of institutional power. The next thing that really spoke to me and continues to drive my thinking is something called speculative futuring. And it's not really definable. There's been some really great events on it. Sophia Leung held a speculative futuring in libraries event at MIT several years ago. But I like to think of it as anything where marginalized folks are imagining themselves into previously denied spaces of thought, creation, and ways of being. I think of it as the possibility I feel bound up within everything that N.K. Jemisin has ever written. It's Misha Green's interpretation of Lovecraft Country in that pivotal HBO series. It's Solange's entire When I Get Home album and the various call and responses on each track. It's Black, queer, trans, and disabled folks shouting, "I'm here," with our art, our workings, our music, our films. I can't recommend a specific title for this, but rather I suggest you find the artists, the creatives, the facilitators, the activists, the people making things in this world that move you, and find time to let those things hold you outside of your normal processes, right? And lastly, critical pedagogies of all kinds have held me deeply. And there are almost too many to name, but for me specifically, critical race theory, womanist thought, disability studies, and queer studies have lent me the strength and the language to express myself when my own words fall short. And now this I can recommend a very specific read from. I love the volume 14, issue 1 of Communications and Information Literacy, which features tons of articles from scholars and quite a few scholars of color reflecting radically on their role within library instruction. And in fact, a particular piece from that issue spoke directly to Black, Indigenous, and library workers of color, which felt so revolutionary given that a lot of our work around instruction kind of centers on whiteness, white feelings, and white reflections. In Dreaming Revolutionary Futures, Sophia Leung and Jorge R. Lopez McKnight state to place ourselves directly in the spotlight, to be at the front of a classroom, with a room full of people, to sit and listen to us is both speculative fiction and an act of defiance, refusal, and resistance. Having rarely seen anyone who looked like us in front of a college or university classroom who was a librarian meant that we had to envision ourselves there and bring it into reality. And with that in mind, I can launch in and talk about the ways my own work has done sort of speculative things that have pushed my own boundaries. And the main thing, firstly, I'm just going with really what Sophia and Jorge state, that feeling of, by placing myself in front of the classroom, whether it's digital or physical, I am embodying speculative criticalities. And yes, I do believe it's enough for Black, Indigenous, Asian American, and Pacific Islander folks with all of our intersectionalities along lines of class, disability, gender, sexuality, and spirituality to simply say, I exist on this planet. And each day, that existence is an act of defiance toward systems that were not designed to see me thrive. That's a part of doing the work in my mind. The next thing I've done is I've made space for having critical conversations about race, racialized oppression, and identity in library workplaces as an independent consultant. Now, admittedly, I don't have a blueprint for this. It kind of takes the right environment and the right folks who are willing to have such conversations. But by doing this, it's reframed the power and the importance of setting aside time and space to have these conversations. And my advice would be, if you can't find somebody to talk with you about it at your institution, where can you find someone? Because there is a conversation happening out there. And sometimes it takes looking beyond the academy to find the people that are going to drive you and that you're going to be driving and holding as you take on this work. Now, remember that radical question I asked earlier? What if undergrads could access research support beyond the traditional sort of one shot? In the midst of UC Berkeley's remote learning, my division, the Instructional Services Department, all of my colleagues and I collaboratively speculated on that question. And our department head, Nicole Brown, took the care and the patience and the time to ask us in this new space, what did we want to be doing? How did we want to foster learning in this new and, quite frankly, frightening space? What possibilities might become available by altering our teaching and learning methods? So instead of focusing on what we've done before and how can we suddenly do that now in this digital space, The result of our carving out an hour each week to talk about this was the creation of a group of modules and critical components like this critical source evaluation video I had the pleasure of scripting with Giselle Tanas and Carly Stark, two of my colleagues at Berkeley. And let me be real, this was not an easy change or program to implement. To this day, we engage with principled, caring struggle with the folks and our external colleagues around this new Research 101 program and the methods that we're trying. But it is a struggle that has opened up so much room for touching on topics we never could have prior to trying this direction. And finally, the thing that is most essential to my work, and it's the thing I'm the worst at, I'm good at calling myself out, it's rest. It's respite. It is withdrawal. And I love what Tricia Hersey from the Nap Ministry asks in her forthcoming book, Rest is Resistance, a Manifesto. She just asked the question, what would it even be like to live in a well-rested world? And I want to know the answer to that. That's another speculative imagining to me that I am dedicated to figuring out, at least within my own praxis. And I cannot draw from a well that is empty. I have to take time and rest to refill it. That's how I see it. Now, as we move towards the end of our time together, I want to pose one more question to you. I'd like you to imagine what a liberatory, speculative pedagogy might look like at your own institution. And I want you to be broad with your thoughts here. Consider all the places and spaces that library learning happens, right? It could be in a classroom, but maybe it's at a service desk. Maybe it's where your student workers gather. It's with the consultations you do or the campus connections you build with external admin and colleagues or faculty. Imagine it. And I want you to think about, what does your role look like in supporting that work? And it doesn't have to be big, but take another 3 minutes to just meditate on this question. And again, if you feel inclined, you can share some of your thoughts in the chat. All right, y'all. I saw some beautiful reflections from folks, specifically around just even from the previous one about your time, being able to value your work in a different way, being able to take pressure out of that one-shot time constraint. And I feel like that is what speculative pedagogies are so beautiful for, because they pose questions like we can ask ourselves, what would it mean? What does taking pressure off of ourselves look like? And how do we set aside kindness and prepare ourselves for the external pressures that may result from prioritizing that work, right? There's different levels that you can use to sort of suss this out. And I'm so excited to see what folks are thinking of. Now, I talk about all this work, and you've done all this thought work. And I think about it as I want to see a library reckoning. And frankly, so much of speculative pedagogy and thought is about continuing to push. It's kind of like, what would a library reckoning look like, which is what feels like the ultimate question, speculative question to me. And I'm going to imagine that there is no one answer. It's going to look very different depending on our institutions and people involved. And more importantly, it's not a reckoning without your co-conspirators, your collaborators, and your communities. Us in this room is beautiful, but there are people missing from this conversation too, right? So you may not be able to build a reckoning or shift your entire perspective or the way you work today or in this singular moment, but you can continue to do what you started, which is setting those intentions. You can acknowledge where you still need to learn or unlearn. You can say specifically, I am going to carve out boundaries for myself. You can uncover the stories that you've told yourself and what truths that you've buried about your work, or the desires for your work and what you want to be doing. You can let yourself be whole and enough as a library worker, as an instructor, or a caregiver, or a parent, or a child, or all of the ways that you show up in this world. Change work is nonlinear and messy, and there are always more questions than answers. And the answers even are always changing because we are always changing. And so to speculate in truly radical ways means embracing discomfort. And in some ways, I love this quote from Jana Brown, who wrote Black Utopias. All we can do is surrender to the unknown and unknowable and be open to vast amounts of change. Sit and feel yourself and your work. Continue to name what matters to you. Write, sing, dance, create. Do the big, do the small. It's all enough. And with that, I just want to bring us home with some questions for you to hold and continue your learning. I want you to ask yourself, what are you going to do today to invite today's learnings in? What's one small step you can take to open yourself up to radical possibility and reframing your own thoughts? And most importantly, this is no surprise by now, right? When are you going to rest so that all of these learnings have time and space to stew, so that your well can be refilled, so that you might draw from it once more? With that, I've come to the end of my presentation time, and I appreciate all of you showing up and making space for this moment. I'm happy to answer your questions if there are any, but just thank you, everybody, for sharing your dreamings and for showing up this morning. And we've been gathering questions, I believe, in a document, and I have it open and I don't actually see any, which is beautiful and okay, because sometimes we just need to sit and have some silence, right? So if there are no questions, that's beautiful and fine too. Thanks, y'all. Actually, I do see we have a question that came in here. Let me give myself a moment to read it. I love this question. Okay, so this person asked, as someone who also writes creatively, this was so helpful in thinking about how that practice can interact with my work. What are your thoughts about keeping them separate versus braiding them together? I've always kept a strict boundary, but I'm rethinking that. I love this because I have the same kinds of questions about my own creative work versus my teaching and instruction. And I have to say, for me, I am finding a lot of value in blending them, but blending them carefully, I think. There are times where I actually bring writing activities and exercises into a one shot or into my conversations with students, especially when talking about elements of care. I've begun to feel like it's also one thing I want to do with my instruction is remind students that they are more than their grades and they're more than that paper that they're talking to me about, because I don't know about y'all, but a lot of times students will share kind of, things they're not saying to their instructors, like their anxieties, their fears, their concerns post-graduation. And so a lot of times the topics will stray off the paper entirely. We'll talk about finding them, resources for their paper, but then we'll talk about their dreams and their wants. And I find there's something really powerful about saying, like, I found time to continue to write and I also produce, but like my job is just a job. I love what I do, but like I am this whole person outside of my work, and you can be and you should be a whole person outside of your studies. That doesn't always happen, but I think in those situations, I find a lot of power in talking about my creative work with kind of my like academic and library colleagues and partners. But I respect people if they also want to keep it separate, because I think a lot of this work is about autonomy and drawing boundaries. And sometimes you tell someone, oh yeah, I got this other well over here. And then suddenly they're trying to draw from you. And it's like, wait a minute. So I don't think there's a wrong answer, but that's how I've been approaching it. I've been opening it up a little bit more. Thank you for that beautiful question. Ooh, I think we just got another one. Let me take a look. Ooh, this is a big one. Someone asks, how do we continue to practice hope and stay committed to speculation when we are also holding space for grief and trauma? This is real. And I will say that I think the only way I have found is to to process that is to actually allow myself to grieve and to not sort of toxically posify. That's not a word. I just made it a word. To make everything so toxically positive that I can't acknowledge when I am hurting or when my community or my family is hurting. So I think it's about understanding for me that the grief and the trauma is also a part of that speculative process of thought, rather than sort of saying, oh, how can I do this, that, and the third, and ignore all of what I'm feeling. A lot of times this is uncomfortable. A lot of times it's meant sitting through pain and tears and holding space for this grief and rage, to be frank. But I always feel stronger for letting myself feel it. And then coming back to the speculative thoughts feels more capable because I've let myself be in that down space and in that space of hurt as well. So I don't know that there's a way to, I don't know that you have to stay committed to speculative thought. I think you can step away from it when you need to. You can say, today is not possibility. Today is a dark day and I'm making room for my feelings. And then tomorrow or next week or next month can be that speculative where you return to that open-minded possibility kind of thought space. And just make sure you have people holding you in that dark space too, right? Because it's rough. It can be rough. And I don't think anyone should go it alone when they need to be held. So I think that's my answer to that. And I hope that helped. Thank you, Anonymous, for that question. We have a couple more minutes. This is technically ending at 10:20. So if any final questions come through, folks can feel free to send those in. And I'm on Twitter, so I'll put my information into the chat if folks want to talk to me separately, either via email or if you're on social media and you want to holler at me there. Yes, I see something here from Jenny. Will you have a list of sources you cited? I do. I actually have those in my slides. So I will share them with the committee members. I think my slides go up with my presentation, perhaps. If they don't, I will send the citations to the committee members and hopefully they can send a large email out. Oh, and I see Megan saying, yes, the slides will go up. So you'll get the citations. Amazing. As we wind to this last minute together, again, thank you all so much. Thank you to the steering committee members for inviting me. And I hope to see y'all around in some other sessions today. But now I think it's time for a break, right?